What happens when corporate security tries to destroy the wrong woman, not knowing she would return as the FBI director with the power to investigate them all? This is a story about corporate corruption, betrayal, and the ultimate reversal of power that no one saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible tale of justice and revenge, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe that corruption always catches up in the end, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more powerful stories that expose the truth. The glass towers of downtown Phoenix gleamed under the desert sun, their reflective surfaces creating a maze of corporate power and influence that dominated the Arizona skyline. Among these monuments to American capitalism stood the headquarters of Meridian Defense Systems, a 50-story testament to the military-industrial complex that had grown fat on government contracts and technological innovation. Diana Martinez walked through the gleaming marble lobby of Meridian Defense Systems at precisely 8:15 on a Monday morning in September, her security badge clipped to the lapel of her charcoal business suit. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her position through intelligence, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to ethical conduct that had become increasingly rare in the corporate world. Diana was a senior systems analyst in Meridian's cybersecurity division, responsible for protecting the company's classified government contracts from foreign espionage and internal threats. Her work involved analyzing security protocols, investigating potential breaches, and ensuring that sensitive military technologies remained protected from hostile actors. It was demanding work that required the highest level of security clearance and absolute trustworthiness. What Diana didn't know as she settled into her cubicle that morning was that her reputation for integrity had made her a target. For months, she had been documenting irregularities in the company's security protocols, questionable financial transactions, and potential violations of federal contracting regulations. Her reports had been dutifully filed with her supervisors, but instead of addressing her concerns, they had begun viewing her as a threat to their lucrative but illegal operations. The corruption at Meridian Defense Systems ran deep, involving senior executives, government liaisons, and a network of private contractors who had been systematically defrauding the Pentagon for years. At the center of this criminal enterprise was Director of Corporate Security Marcus Webb, a former military intelligence officer who had used his connections and expertise to build a sophisticated operation that sold classified military technologies to foreign governments while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business operations. Webb's operation was protected by a carefully constructed web of bribes, blackmail, and intimidation that had successfully silenced previous whistleblowers and investigators. When corporate employees raised questions about irregularities, they found themselves facing trumped-up charges, career-ending accusations, and sometimes physical threats that convinced them to remain silent or leave the company entirely. Diana Martinez represented a different kind of threat. Her security clearance, technical expertise, and detailed knowledge of the company's operations made her uniquely dangerous to Webb's criminal enterprise. Unlike previous employees who had raised concerns, Diana had the skills and access necessary to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy and present evidence that could bring down the entire operation. Webb had been monitoring Diana's activities for months, reviewing her computer access logs, intercepting her communications, and building a file of potentially compromising information that could be used against her if necessary. His surveillance had revealed that Diana was methodically documenting security violations and building a comprehensive case that could expose the criminal network he had worked so hard to protect. The decision to eliminate Diana as a threat had been made during a private meeting between Webb and CEO Jonathan Blackstone, held in the executive conference room on the 50th floor of the Meridian Tower. The conversation had been carefully orchestrated to maintain plausible deniability while making clear what needed to be done. Diana Martinez has become a problem, Webb had said, spreading Diana's personnel file across the polished conference table. Her security analysis work has given her access to information that could be misinterpreted if it fell into the wrong hands. Blackstone, a cold-eyed executive who had built his fortune through morally questionable business practices, understood the implication immediately. What kind of misinterpretation are we talking about? The kind that could suggest improper handling of classified materials, Webb replied carefully. The kind that could result in federal investigations and congressional hearings that would be very damaging to the company's reputation and government contracts. The plan they developed was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. Webb would plant classified documents in Diana's personal files, create evidence of unauthorized access to restricted systems, and build a case suggesting that she had been selling military secrets to foreign intelligence services. The evidence would be discovered during a routine security audit, leading to her immediate termination and criminal prosecution that would destroy her career and credibility. Make it convincing, Blackstone had instructed. I want her completely discredited so that anything she might say about the company's operations will be dismissed as the desperate lies of a convicted traitor. Webb had smiled with satisfaction. Creating false evidence was one of his specialties, and he had the resources and connections necessary to ensure that Diana Martinez would never be able to threaten their operation again. The setup began immediately. Webb's security team started planting classified documents in Diana's computer files, creating fake email accounts that appeared to be connected to foreign intelligence services, and establishing financial records that suggested she had received payments for providing sensitive information. Every detail was carefully crafted to create an unshakable narrative of espionage and betrayal. Within 2 weeks, the trap was ready. Webb scheduled a mandatory security audit of the cybersecurity division, ostensibly as part of routine compliance procedures but actually designed to discover the evidence he had planted against Diana. The audit team, composed of Webb's trusted subordinates, would find the compromising materials and trigger the investigation that would destroy her life. On the morning of the audit, Diana arrived at work unaware that her world was about to collapse. She had spent the weekend reviewing security protocols for a new government contract, and her mind was focused on the technical challenges of protecting classified information from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. She had no idea that she was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would brand her as the very type of security threat she had dedicated her career to preventing. The security audit began at 9 o'clock sharp, with Webb personally overseeing the process to ensure that everything proceeded according to his plan. Diana was instructed to remain at her desk while auditors examined her computer systems, reviewed her file access logs, and searched her workspace for any security violations. At 10:30, Webb approached Diana's cubicle with a grim expression and 2 security officers flanking him. "Ms. Martinez, we need you to come with us immediately. We've discovered some irregularities that require immediate investigation." Diana looked up from her computer screen, confusion evident in her dark eyes. "What kind of irregularities?" "I've been following all security protocols." "That's what we need to discuss," Webb replied, his voice carrying an ominous undertone that made Diana's stomach tighten with anxiety. "Please gather your personal belongings and come with us to the security office." As Diana was escorted through the corporate offices, she could feel the stares of her colleagues and the whispered conversations that followed in her wake. Webb's security team had clearly spread word that something serious was happening, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that would make it difficult for anyone to question the official narrative. The security office was located in the basement levels of the Meridian Tower, a sterile environment of concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and surveillance equipment that was designed to intimidate and disorient anyone brought in for questioning. Diana was seated in a metal chair facing Webb's desk while security officers positioned themselves near the door, creating the impression that she was already considered a criminal rather than an employee under investigation. "Ms. Martinez," Webb began, opening a thick file folder that contained the fabricated evidence he had spent weeks creating, "we've discovered serious security breaches that appear to be connected to your computer access and personal accounts." He spread several documents across his desk, each one carefully crafted to suggest that Diana had been engaged in espionage activities. Bank statements showing mysterious deposits, email printouts indicating contact with foreign nationals, and classified documents that appeared to have been accessed from her computer terminal created a compelling narrative of betrayal and criminal conduct. Diana stared at the documents in shock, immediately recognizing that they had been fabricated but unable to understand how such sophisticated forgeries had been created or why she was being targeted. "This is impossible," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that was building in her chest. "I've never seen these documents before, and I certainly haven't had any contact with foreign intelligence services." Webb leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a hunter who had cornered his prey. The evidence speaks for itself, Ms. Martinez. We have bank records showing payments from overseas accounts, email communications with known intelligence operatives, and classified documents that were accessed from your computer terminal and subsequently transmitted to unauthorized recipients. Those records are fake, Diana replied firmly, her analytical mind beginning to piece together the sophistication of the setup she was facing. Someone has gone to considerable effort to create false evidence and frame me for crimes I didn't commit. That's a very serious accusation, Webb said, though his tone suggested he was more amused than concerned by her protests. Are you suggesting that Meridian Defense Systems would fabricate evidence against one of its own employees? Diana realized that she was facing something far more serious than a simple misunderstanding or administrative error. The level of detail in the fabricated evidence, the coordination required to plant it in multiple systems, and Webb's obvious confidence in the narrative all suggested a sophisticated conspiracy designed to destroy her career and credibility. I want to contact my attorney, Diana said, recognizing that she needed legal representation to navigate what was clearly a complex criminal setup. I also want to request an independent investigation of these allegations by federal authorities. Webb's expression hardened at the mention of federal involvement. The last thing he wanted was outside scrutiny of the evidence he had fabricated or the broader criminal activities it was designed to conceal. Ms. Martinez, you're currently facing charges of espionage, treason, and theft of classified materials. These are federal crimes that carry sentences of life imprisonment or even death. I strongly suggest you cooperate with our internal investigation rather than making demands that will only make your situation worse. The threat was clear and expertly delivered. Webb was using Diana's knowledge of national security law against her, knowing that the charges he was describing would terrify anyone who understood their implications. Most employees facing such accusations would panic and accept whatever plea arrangement was offered rather than risk the devastating consequences of a federal prosecution. But Diana Martinez was not most employees. Her analytical training had taught her to look beyond surface appearances and identify the underlying patterns that revealed the truth of complex situations. As she studied Webb's behavior, the timing of the discovery, and the nature of the evidence being presented, she began to understand that she was not facing legitimate criminal charges but rather an elaborate frame-up designed to silence her and protect a larger criminal conspiracy. Director Webb, she said, her voice carrying new authority despite her vulnerable position, I believe you and I both know that these charges are fabricated. The question is why you've gone to such elaborate lengths to frame me and what you're trying to prevent me from exposing. Webb's jaw tightened at her direct challenge to the narrative he had carefully constructed. Few people had the courage or analytical ability to see through his sophisticated deceptions, and Diana's refusal to be intimidated suggested that she might be even more dangerous than he had originally believed. Ms. Martinez, you're in no position to make accusations or demands. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your only option is to cooperate with our investigation and hope for leniency in sentencing. Diana realized that further argument would be futile. Webb clearly had no intention of conducting a legitimate investigation or allowing her to present a defense against the fabricated charges. Her only option was to prepare for a legal battle that would pit her word against a sophisticated criminal conspiracy backed by corporate resources and government connections. I want to call my attorney now, she repeated, knowing that Webb would likely try to prevent her from obtaining legal representation that could expose the weaknesses in his fabricated case. Webb nodded to one of the security officers, who stepped forward with handcuffs. Ms. Martinez, you're under corporate security detention pending transfer to federal authorities. You'll be allowed one phone call after you've been processed. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Diana felt a cold rage building in her chest. She had dedicated her career to protecting national security and preventing exactly the kind of criminal activity that was now being used to destroy her life. Webb and his conspirators had turned the system she had served against her, using her own integrity and dedication as weapons in their criminal enterprise. But as she was led away to a holding cell in the basement of the Meridian Tower, Diana Martinez made a silent vow. If she survived the legal battle that was about to begin, she would not only clear her name but also expose the criminal conspiracy that had tried to destroy her. Webb and his associates had made the mistake of targeting someone with the skills, knowledge, and determination necessary to bring them down. They would learn that Diana Martinez was not just another employee who could be silenced and discredited. She was about to become their worst nightmare, and the very expertise they feared would eventually be used to dismantle their criminal empire piece by piece. The corporate detention facility in Meridian's basement was designed to hold employees suspected of security violations while company investigators determined whether to involve federal authorities. Diana found herself in a small windowless room with concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and minimal furnishings that created an atmosphere of isolation and psychological pressure. For 3 days, she was held in corporate custody while Webb's security team continued building their case against her. During this time, Diana was denied access to her attorney, her family, and any outside communication that could compromise the narrative Webb was constructing. The legal justification for this detention was questionable at best, but Meridian's corporate lawyers had crafted agreements that gave the company broad authority to restrict employee communications during security investigations. Diana used the forced isolation to analyze every aspect of the conspiracy she was facing. Her cybersecurity training had taught her to identify patterns, trace digital evidence, and understand how sophisticated criminal operations maintained their security while conducting illegal activities. As she mentally reviewed the fabricated evidence presented by Webb, she began to identify inconsistencies and anomalies that revealed the artificial nature of the materials. The bank records showing mysterious deposits had timestamps that didn't align with her actual activities during those periods. The email communications with supposed foreign intelligence operatives contained linguistic patterns and technical references that were inconsistent with genuine intelligence communications. The classified documents allegedly accessed from her computer terminal showed access logs that violated the security protocols she herself had helped design. Most importantly, the entire operation displayed a level of coordination and resource allocation that suggested involvement by multiple departments within Meridian Defense Systems. Webb might be orchestrating the frame-up, but he was clearly working with accomplices throughout the company who had provided access, information, and support necessary to create such sophisticated false evidence. On the 4th day of her detention, Diana was finally transferred to federal custody and charged with espionage, theft of classified materials, and conspiracy to commit treason. The charges were announced with great fanfare by the U.S. Attorney's Office, which praised Meridian Defense Systems for discovering and reporting the security breach that had threatened national security. Diana's arraignment was held in federal court in Phoenix, where she was represented by court-appointed attorney Rebecca Chen, a public defender who specialized in national security cases. Chen was competent and dedicated, but she was also overwhelmed by a caseload that made it difficult to provide the intensive investigation and preparation that Diana's complex case required. "The evidence against you is substantial," Chen explained during their first meeting in the federal holding facility. "The prosecution has bank records, email communications, and classified documents that appear to establish a clear pattern of espionage activity. If convicted on all charges, you could face life imprisonment without possibility of parole." Diana nodded grimly, understanding the severity of her legal situation while remaining convinced that the truth would eventually emerge. "Ms. Chen, all of that evidence has been fabricated by Meridian Security Department. I've identified multiple inconsistencies that prove the materials are fraudulent, but will need access to the original computer systems and financial records to prove it." Chen looked skeptical. "Ms. Martinez, that's a very serious accusation. Are you alleging that a major defense contractor fabricated evidence to frame you for espionage? Do you have any idea how that would sound to a jury?" "I understand how it sounds," Diana replied, "but I also understand cybersecurity well enough to recognize artificial evidence when I see it. Webb and his team made mistakes in their fabrication that can be identified and proven if we have the resources to conduct a proper investigation." Over the following weeks, Chen worked to build a defense based on Diana's claims of fabrication, but she faced enormous challenges. Meridian Defense Systems had corporate lawyers, unlimited resources, and the cooperation of federal prosecutors who were eager to secure a conviction in a high-profile espionage case. The company also had security clearances and government connections that made it difficult for outside investigators to access the evidence necessary to prove Diana's innocence. Meanwhile, Webb continued to solidify his false narrative by providing additional evidence to federal investigators and positioning himself as a patriotic corporate security officer who had discovered and reported a serious threat to national security. His background in military intelligence gave him credibility with federal law enforcement agencies, and his apparent cooperation with the investigation deflected any suspicion that he might be involved in criminal activity himself. The case attracted significant media attention, with news outlets portraying Diana as a dangerous traitor who had betrayed her country for financial gain. Her photograph appeared on television and in newspapers alongside headlines that described her as a corporate spy and military secrets thief. The publicity made it almost impossible for her to receive a fair trial, as potential jurors had already been exposed to extensive coverage that assumed her guilt. Diana watched the media coverage from her federal holding cell, feeling a mixture of rage and determination as she saw her reputation destroyed by lies and fabricated evidence. She knew that clearing her name would require more than just proving her innocence in court. She would need to expose the entire criminal conspiracy that had targeted her and ensure that Webb and his associates faced justice for their crimes. As the weeks turned into months, Diana began to receive visits from federal investigators who were interested in her claims about fabricated evidence. While most law enforcement officials remained convinced of her guilt, a few experienced agents recognized inconsistencies in the case that suggested the possibility of a more complex situation. Special Agent Patricia Santos of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division was one of the few investigators who took Diana's claims seriously. Santos had spent 15 years investigating corporate espionage cases, and she had developed an expertise in identifying fabricated evidence and artificial intelligence operations designed to conceal criminal activity. During her interviews with Diana, Santos was struck by the defendant's technical knowledge, analytical ability, and consistent story about the fabrication. Unlike most espionage defendants who offered elaborate excuses and constantly changing narratives, Diana provided detailed technical explanations of how the evidence against her could have been manufactured and specific suggestions for verification procedures that could prove her innocence. Ms. Martinez, Santos said during one of their meetings, "If your allegations are true, this would represent one of the most sophisticated frame-ups I've ever encountered. The level of coordination, technical expertise, and resources required would suggest involvement by multiple individuals with significant access and authority." Diana nodded. "Agent Santos, I believe Director Webb is running a criminal operation that involves selling classified military technologies to foreign governments. My cybersecurity analysis work was beginning to identify patterns that could expose his activities, so he decided to eliminate me as a threat by framing me for the very crimes he was committing." Santos studied Diana carefully, using her years of experience to assess the credibility of the woman sitting across from her. Everything about Diana's demeanor, knowledge, and consistency suggested that she was telling the truth about the fabrication, but proving it would require an investigation that could span multiple government agencies and corporate departments. "If I were to pursue your allegations," Santos said carefully, "I would need concrete evidence that could withstand scrutiny from defense attorneys, federal prosecutors, and potentially congressional oversight committees. Do you have any specific suggestions for where such evidence might be found?" Diana smiled for the first time since her arrest, recognizing that she had finally found a federal investigator willing to look beyond the surface narrative and examine the possibility that she was the victim rather than the perpetrator of criminal activity. "Agent Santos, I can provide you with a detailed analysis of every piece of evidence against me, showing specific technical indicators that prove fabrication. I can also identify the computer systems, financial networks, and communication channels that Webb would have needed to access in order to create such sophisticated false evidence. Most importantly, I can help you understand the criminal operation he's protecting and provide leads that could expose his entire network." As their conversation continued, Santos began to understand that Diana Martinez might represent more than just another espionage case. If her allegations were true, she could be the key to exposing a major criminal conspiracy that threatened national security far more than any individual spy. The investigation that followed would test every skill Santos had developed during her career and ultimately lead to revelations that would shake the defense contracting industry to its core. What neither Diana nor Santos knew at the time was that their conversation was the beginning of a 5-year investigation that would transform Diana from a defendant into a federal law enforcement officer with the authority to prosecute the very people who had tried to destroy her life. The seeds of that transformation were being planted in a federal holding cell, where an innocent woman's determination to prove her innocence would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in federal law enforcement history. Special Agent Patricia Santos spent the following months conducting a discreet investigation into Diana Martinez's claims about fabricated evidence and corporate espionage at Meridian Defense Systems. Working with a small team of FBI cybersecurity specialists, Santos began the painstaking process of analyzing the digital evidence, financial records, and communication logs that had been used to build the case against Diana. What they discovered was a masterpiece of criminal deception. Webb and his associates had created an incredibly sophisticated false narrative that appeared convincing on the surface but contained subtle technical anomalies that revealed its artificial nature. The bank records showed deposits that had been created through a complex series of international transfers designed to obscure their actual origin. The email communications with supposed foreign intelligence operatives had been generated using advanced artificial intelligence systems that could mimic human conversation patterns but contained linguistic markers that revealed their synthetic nature. Most damning of all, the classified documents allegedly accessed from Diana's computer terminal showed digital signatures and metadata that proved they had been accessed by someone with administrative privileges to the Meridian computer network, not by a regular employee like Diana. The timestamps, file access patterns, and system logs all pointed to an inside job orchestrated by someone with extensive knowledge of the company's security systems. As Santos and her team delved deeper into the investigation, they began to uncover evidence of the broader criminal conspiracy that Diana had suspected. Financial records showed that Webb had been receiving payments from shell companies connected to foreign military procurement agencies. Communication intercepts revealed discussions about selling classified military technologies to unauthorized buyers. Most shocking of all, they found evidence that Webb had been running his espionage operation for over 10 years, systematically looting Meridian's classified research and development projects for personal profit. The investigation also revealed that Diana was not Webb's first victim. Over the years, several other Meridian employees had been framed for security violations, terminated, and in some cases criminally prosecuted to prevent them from exposing Webb's activities. The scope and duration of the criminal conspiracy was staggering, representing one of the most serious breaches of national security in American corporate history. With this evidence, Santos was able to approach federal prosecutors and request a review of Diana's case. The process was complicated by the fact that the original prosecution had been highly publicized and politically sensitive, making it difficult for anyone in the Justice Department to acknowledge that such a massive mistake had been made. However, the technical evidence of fabrication was so overwhelming that even the most skeptical prosecutors had to acknowledge that Diana had been wrongfully accused. After 18 months in federal custody, Diana Martinez was finally released from prison and all charges against her were dismissed. The announcement was made quietly, without the media fanfare that had accompanied her original arrest, and with minimal explanation of how such a serious error had occurred. Diana found herself free but unemployable, her reputation destroyed by the false espionage charges that had been thoroughly reported in the media. But Agent Santos had a different plan for Diana's future. The FBI's investigation into Webb and Meridian Defense Systems was far from complete, and Santos recognized that Diana's technical expertise and insider knowledge of the company made her invaluable to the continuing investigation. After extensive background checks and security clearance reviews, Diana was offered a position as a special consultant to the FBI's counterintelligence division, working directly under Santos to build criminal cases against Webb and his criminal associates. Diana accepted the position without hesitation, motivated not just by the opportunity to clear her name completely but by a burning desire to ensure that Webb and his associates faced justice for their crimes. Over the following 3 years, she worked tirelessly to build airtight cases against every member of the criminal conspiracy, using her cybersecurity expertise to analyze digital evidence and her insider knowledge of Meridian's operations to identify patterns of criminal activity that other investigators might have missed. The investigation expanded far beyond Webb and Meridian Defense Systems, ultimately revealing a network of corrupt defense contractors, government officials, and foreign intelligence services that had been systematically compromising American military technologies for over a decade. Diana's work helped identify security breaches, financial crimes, and espionage activities that had caused billions of dollars in damage to American national security interests. As the investigation progressed, Diana's role evolved from consultant to full-time FBI agent. She completed training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, earned her federal law enforcement credentials, and was assigned to the Bureau's most sensitive counterintelligence operations. Her unique combination of technical expertise, corporate experience, and personal motivation made her exceptionally effective at identifying and investigating complex corporate espionage cases. During this time, Diana also completed a law degree through an accelerated program designed for federal law enforcement officers, specializing in national security law and corporate criminal defense. Her academic work focused on the intersection of corporate security and federal law enforcement, examining how sophisticated criminal organizations used legitimate business structures to conceal their illegal activities. By her 5th year with the FBI, Diana had become one of the Bureau's leading experts on corporate espionage and internal security investigations. Her work had resulted in over 50 criminal convictions and the recovery of hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen intellectual property. She had also developed new investigative techniques and training programs that were being used throughout the federal law enforcement community. It was during this period of professional success that Diana received the call that would change everything. FBI Director William Hayes personally contacted her to discuss a new assignment that would utilize all of her skills and experience in ways she had never imagined. Agent Martinez, Director Hayes said during their private meeting in his Washington office, "I'm offering you the position of Director of Internal Affairs for the FBI's Corporate Security Division. This position would give you authority over all federal investigations involving corporate espionage, defense contractor fraud, and internal security violations. You would be responsible for a staff of over 200 agents and analysts, with a budget of $50 million and jurisdiction over cases involving the nation's most sensitive military and intelligence contracts." Diana felt her heart racing as she absorbed the magnitude of the opportunity being offered. The position would make her one of the most powerful federal law enforcement officers in the country, with authority over exactly the types of cases that had destroyed and then rebuilt her life. "Director Hayes," she replied, "I'm honored by your confidence in my abilities. I accept the position." What Diana didn't know at the time was that her new assignment would bring her full circle to confront the very people who had tried to destroy her life years earlier. Webb and several of his associates had been released from federal prison after serving reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. They had returned to the corporate security industry, believing that their past crimes had been forgotten and that they were safe from further prosecution. They were about to learn that Diana Martinez had not forgotten anything, and that she now had the federal authority to investigate, prosecute, and destroy their lives with the same systematic thoroughness they had once used against her. The hunted was about to become the hunter, and the corporate security professionals who had once felt untouchable were about to discover that their past victims had not disappeared but had evolved into their worst nightmare. Director Diana Martinez walked through the marble lobby of the FBI's Corporate Security Division headquarters in Washington, D.C., on her first day in her new position. The building was a monument to federal law enforcement authority, its imposing architecture designed to remind visitors that the power of the United States government was not to be underestimated or challenged. At 37, Diana carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the worst that criminal conspiracies could inflict and emerged stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. Her navy blue business suit was immaculate, her federal credentials prominently displayed, and her dark eyes held the focused intensity of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Her first order of business was to review the division's active case files, paying particular attention to investigations involving defense contractors and corporate espionage. What she found was a systematic pattern of corporate criminal activity that had been allowed to flourish under previous leadership, with many cases receiving insufficient investigation and inadequate prosecution that allowed criminal organizations to continue operating with minimal interference. Among the files that caught her attention was an ongoing investigation into irregularities at Phoenix-based defense contractors, including companies that had been spawned from former Meridian Defense Systems operations after that company had been dissolved following the Webb scandal. The file indicated that several former Meridian employees, including individuals who had been involved in the original conspiracy against Diana, were now working for these new companies and potentially continuing their criminal activities under different corporate structures. Diana smiled grimly as she read the file. Webb and his associates had apparently believed that changing company names and relocating operations would allow them to resume their criminal activities without interference from federal law enforcement. They had underestimated the long memory of the federal government and the determination of their former victim to ensure that justice was ultimately served. Her first major decision as director was to launch Operation Phoenix Rising, a comprehensive investigation into the network of former Meridian employees and their new corporate entities. The operation would utilize every resource at her disposal, including surveillance teams, financial analysts, cybersecurity specialists, and undercover agents who would infiltrate the suspect organizations and gather evidence of ongoing criminal activity. Within 6 months, Operation Phoenix Rising had generated enough evidence to support criminal charges against 12 individuals and 4 corporations. The investigation revealed that Webb and his associates had indeed resumed their espionage activities, selling classified military technologies to foreign governments and using their new corporate structures to launder the proceeds of their criminal enterprise. Most satisfying to Diana was the discovery that Webb himself had been operating under the assumption that his past crimes had been forgotten and that his cooperation with federal investigators had earned him permanent immunity from further prosecution. He had established a new corporate security consulting firm and was advising other defense contractors on how to protect their classified information from exactly the kind of espionage activities he was secretly conducting. Diana personally led the raid on Webb's Phoenix office, arriving with a team of 20 federal agents and a warrant authorizing the seizure of all computer equipment, financial records, and communication devices on the premises. The look of shock and recognition on Webb's face when he saw Diana walk through his office doors was worth every day of suffering he had inflicted on her years earlier. "Marcus Webb," Diana announced, her voice carrying the full authority of her federal position, "you're under arrest for espionage, conspiracy, wire fraud, and violation of federal national security statutes. You have the right to remain silent." As Webb was handcuffed and led away, Diana felt a sense of completion that she had been seeking for years. The man who had tried to destroy her life by framing her for espionage was now facing genuine espionage charges that would likely result in a life sentence in federal prison. The corporate security director who had once held absolute power over her fate was now completely at the mercy of the federal law enforcement system she represented. But Diana's satisfaction went beyond personal revenge. The broader investigation had exposed a network of corporate espionage that had been operating for over 15 years, compromising American military technologies and causing billions of dollars in damage to national security interests. Her work had not only brought justice to her personal tormentors but had also protected American military personnel and allies who depended on the security of classified military technologies. The media coverage of Webb's arrest was extensive, with news outlets describing the investigation as one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in FBI history. Diana found herself featured in newspapers and television reports as the FBI director who had dismantled a major espionage network, though the stories generally focused on her professional accomplishments rather than her personal history as a victim of the same criminal organization. During Webb's trial, Diana had the unique experience of testifying not as a defendant but as the federal law enforcement officer who had led the investigation that brought him to justice. She presented evidence methodically and professionally, using the same analytical skills that had once been used to frame her to build an unshakable case against the man who had destroyed her life and threatened American national security. Webb's defense attorneys attempted to portray him as a patriotic former military officer who had been entrapped by overzealous federal agents, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, and testimony from cooperating witnesses painted a clear picture of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had operated for years under the cover of legitimate business activities. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Webb was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his life in federal prison paying for the crimes he had committed and the lives he had destroyed. As Webb was led away in shackles, Diana felt a profound sense of closure. The criminal who had once held the power to frame her for espionage was now himself convicted of espionage and facing a life sentence in federal prison. The corporate security system that had once been used to silence and intimidate whistleblowers was now being investigated and dismantled by the very person it had tried to destroy. In the years that followed, Director Diana Martinez became one of the most respected federal law enforcement officers in the country, leading investigations that resulted in hundreds of criminal convictions and the recovery of billions of dollars in stolen intellectual property. Her work helped establish new standards for corporate accountability and federal oversight.